No one in the audience at the Chicago Civic Theater could have imagined that the gala night, an evening promoted as full of hope and compassion, would begin with such chilling silence. The stage lights blazed brightly. Rows of red velvet seats were packed, perfectly pressed suits, shimmering evening gowns, as if everyone seated there believed they were playing the lead role in a noble film. The live stream cameras glided across each face. The viewer count in the corner of the screen jumped every second. 1 million, then 2. And at that exact moment, Madeline Cross's voice rang out. No shouting, no anger, just a single sentence spoken softly yet sharp as a blade. The man in the janitor's uniform back there? Please step onto the stage. The entire hall froze. Hundreds of heads snapped toward the wings. The cameras zoomed in instantly, missing nothing. The man stood rigid. His name was Ethan Miller, 35 years old, narrow shoulders, a slightly hunched back, not from age, but from years spent bending down to mop floors, push trash carts, living quietly like a shadow. Yellow rubber gloves still covered his hands. A cleaning cloth hung loosely over his shoulder. He had finished his backstage shift 10 minutes earlier. He had been about to leave. He always left before the lights came on. But tonight, the lights found him. Ethan swallowed hard. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't think. Don't explain. Madeline cut him off, her voice still sweet to the point of artificiality. She stepped down a few stairs and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, not a gesture of sympathy, but the touch of someone accustomed to giving orders. She pulled him toward the center of the stage, like dragging an exhibit into public view. So everyone can see, Madeline said, smiling at the audience. Who here truly has a voice, and who is merely taking up space? A few scattered laughs echoed, not loud, but cold. Ethan felt his heart pounding, so hard he thought the microphone clipped to his chest might pick it up. He stood there, a janitor, at the center of a stage where stars had once stood, where names were born, and where honor could be buried in a matter of seconds. Madeline turned to the band and snapped her fingers. Higher ground, she said. That one. A faint smile flickered at the corner of her lips. That song was not just the biggest hit of Madeline Cross's career. It was a symbol, the reason people called her a diva. The high note she had once declared, no one in this world can sing, except me. As the band prepared to come in, Madeline stepped closer to Ethan. She turned off her own microphone, but Ethan's microphone was still on. Her voice dropped low, just enough for the entire hall and millions of online viewers to hear every word. Try to fail quietly, kid. The air solidified, as if someone had just drained all the oxygen from the room. Ethan stood under the harsh white lights, cold, sweat running down his spine. He could feel hundreds of eyes in the room and millions of invisible gazes upon him, judging, curious, waiting for humiliation. But what Madeline did not know was this moment not merely an act of humiliation. It was the beginning of the collapse of a lie that had lasted 15 years. 4 hours earlier, Ethan Miller had not been standing on a stage. He was kneeling beneath the empty audience seats, wiping away shoe prints from the red carpet, marks left by the wealthy, the famous, the powerful. He had worked here for 3 years. No one knew who he used to be, and he did not want anyone to know. 5 years earlier, the name Ethan Miller had appeared on national television. American Star Rising, a young man from Ohio with a rare tenor voice and gentle yet resolute eyes. The judges had called him the most dangerous dark horse of the season. Final night. The backstage area was packed. The lights were so hot that the air felt thick. Ethan stood behind the curtains, his hands trembling, not from fear, but because he knew that once he stepped out there, his life would take a different direction. Then his phone vibrated. An unknown number. "This is St. Mary's Hospital. Your wife is in critical condition. Acute pneumonia. Respiratory failure. Immediate surgical consent required." Ethan didn't ask anyone, didn't seek permission, didn't go on air to explain. He left. That was all. And America did not forgive him for it. The next day, social media exploded. Unprofessional, ungrateful, throwing away his own dream. Madeline Cross appeared on a morning talk show that same day, sitting upright, her gaze cold. "Anyone who does not respect opportunity," she said, "does not deserve a dream." That sentence slammed every door shut. 3 days later, Ethan's wife passed away. His daughter, Emma, was born 8 weeks premature, a hole in her heart, a tiny body weighing less than 2 kilograms. Ethan disappeared from the entertainment industry. No record label, no stage, not a single inquiry. Only a single father and a child were forced to grow up in hospitals. Tonight, the Voices for Tomorrow Gala was being held to raise funds for children with congenital heart disease. It sounded beautiful. Ethan knew exactly what heart surgery in America cost. He knew that number was not something everyone could bear. He also knew that Emma's image was appearing on the massive LED screen behind the stage. He had signed the consent forms. He believed that, at the very least, his child's pain could help save other children. But during the afternoon rehearsal, when Madeline began to sing, Ethan heard something no one else noticed. A high note. Too perfect. Not human. He heard the metallic quality in the sound, the way it sat on top of the harmony instead of blending into it. A tiny detail, but to someone who had lived by music, it was unmistakable. Ethan stayed silent until Madeline called him onto the stage, until she turned his silence into entertainment, until his daughter, somewhere in a hospital room, believed that woman was a good person. And as Ethan stood under the lights, rubber gloves still on his hands, he understood that. If he bowed his head and walked away, he would be teaching his child a lesson, that truth can be buried as long as the liar holds enough power. Ethan took a deep breath. The band began the intro, and the entire world held its breath. The music began to play. The opening chords of Higher Ground flowed from the orchestra like a familiar wave, smooth, polished, and emotionally sterile in its perfection. The entire Chicago Civic Theater seemed to relax its shoulders, as if everyone already knew how this would go. A janitor standing where he did not belong, a diva about to prove why she stood above the rest, and then everything ending with a round of polite applause. Only Ethan Miller could not relax. He stood there under the harsh white lights, feeling as though the temperature around him was several degrees colder than the rest of the room. Not out of fear, not exactly, but because memories were rising, memories he had tried to bury for 5 years. When Madeline Cross began to sing the opening lines, the hall fell silent. Her voice was the same as ever, polished, trained, every breath controlled. The kind of voice people heard on the radio, on albums, at major award shows. Not bad, even good. But Ethan heard something else. He heard excessive caution. He heard avoidance in the way she handled the transitions. And most importantly, he heard fear, carefully concealed. The song moved steadily toward its climax. The melody climbed step by step like a staircase leading straight to the high note that had built Madeline Cross's reputation. Ethan swallowed. No one in the hall noticed anything unusual, but to him, a man who had lived in the world of pitch, frequency, and breath, everything had already begun to fall out of sync. His mind returned to that afternoon's rehearsal. The Chicago Civic Theater had been quiet, rows of empty seats. Only half the stage lights turned on. Ethan was cleaning the glass backstage when Madeline walked in to warm up her voice. No evening gown, no cameras, just a woman in a light jacket holding a water bottle standing alone on an empty stage. The band began to play. The opening lines passed smoothly, but as the melody approached the high section, Ethan saw Madeline's neck tense, her shoulders lifted slightly, a sign so subtle only those with serious vocal training would notice. Then she tried to reach the highest note. Her voice broke. Not loudly, not catastrophically, but enough to expose the limit. Madeline stopped and cleared her throat. "My throat's a little dry," she said, as if explaining herself to the air. She turned to the sound technician, lowering her voice. "Turn up the backing track." On the second attempt, the high note rang out, complete, bright, and unnaturally perfect. Ethan stood frozen. He heard the difference. Not emotionally, but technically. That sound carried a thin, metallic layer. It did not blend into the orchestra. It sat atop it, like a perfectly placed overlay. That was not a live voice. That was a recording. Ethan said nothing. He returned to the janitor's room and sat down on an old plastic chair, his hands trembling slightly, not from anger but from a question looping endlessly in his mind. Who would believe a floor cleaner against a diva? Back to the present. Madeline was nearing the climax on stage. Her face still held a confident smile, but Ethan noticed the tension around her jaw. She knew the note was coming. She knew she could not sing it, not with her authentic voice. And at that moment, Ethan looked up at the large screen behind the stage. Images moved slowly across it. Children in hospitals, IV lines, heart monitors, fragile smiles filled with hope. Then he saw his daughter, Emma, 7 years old, thin hair, large, clear eyes, just like her mother's. The image appeared for only a few seconds, but to Ethan, it felt like a blow straight to the chest. He remembered the previous night in their small apartment on the south side of Chicago. Emma lay in bed, the heart monitor beeping steadily. Ethan sat beside her, singing very softly as if afraid of disturbing the fragile air around her. "Daddy," Emma whispered when the song ended, "I like hearing you sing." "Why?" Ethan asked, smiling. "Because when you sing," she said, placing a hand on her chest, "my heart beats more evenly." The nurses had noticed it too. Emma's heart rate stabilized whenever she heard her father's voice. No one could explain why, but Ethan knew. Not because of technique, not because of pitch, but because of love. And now, that love was being exploited, used as a backdrop for a lie dressed up in lights and counterfeit compassion. Madeline reached the high note. The sound rang out perfectly. The hall erupted in applause. But Ethan did not clap. He stood there, arms hanging at his sides, rubber gloves still on his hands, and in that moment, something shifted inside him. Not an explosive burst of anger, but a quiet, heavy decision, irreversible. He thought of the surgery costs. He thought of the hospital bills. He thought of how, if he stayed silent tonight, everything could continue. Madeline would go on being celebrated, selling tickets, standing on this stage with a voice that was not truly hers. And Emma would grow up and one day watch this video, believing that her father had chosen to bow his head. Ethan could not let that happen. Madeline turned to him, her smile curving upward, her eyes sparkling with victory. "See?" her gaze seemed to say. "This is the difference between us." But she could not see what was happening inside the man standing before her. Ethan was no longer the 30-year-old young man trembling behind the curtains of a television show. He was a father who had lost his wife, who had spent hundreds of sleepless nights in hospitals, who had learned to live with fear without letting it control him. He had not stepped onto the stage to be noticed. He stayed because he could not leave. Madeline turned back toward the audience, raising her hand to signal the band to prepare for the next section. At that exact moment, Ethan stepped forward half a step. No one noticed immediately. It was a tiny movement, but it was enough for Madeline to turn her head. "Is there something wrong?" she asked, her voice still polite. Ethan opened his mouth. He did not speak loudly. He did not shout. He spoke just loudly enough for the microphone on his chest to pick it up. "Excuse me," he said. "May I ask a question?" Madeline hesitated slightly. A faint crease appeared between her eyebrows. "What question?" Ethan looked straight at her, then out at the audience, then back at the screen where his daughter's image had just disappeared. "Could you turn off the backing track?" The air seemed to freeze. Murmurs spread like an undercurrent. Madeline smiled lightly, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "That's part of the performance," she replied. "At this afternoon's rehearsal," Ethan continued, his voice still steady, "you sang without it." This time the silence was heavier. Madeline felt her heart drop a beat. She looked at the man in front of her, the man she had assumed was merely a prop for a brief spectacle, and for the first time that night she realized something unsettling. He was not trembling. He was not bowing his head, and he was no longer willing to stay silent. Somewhere in the audience, a phone was raised higher than usual. The cameras shifted. The story, meant to end quickly, had just turned onto a different path. A path no one on this stage could control anymore. No one in the Chicago Civic Theater was breathing more heavily than usual, but no one dared to breathe lightly either. Ethan Miller's question, simple, polite, carrying not the slightest hint of challenge in his tone, fell onto the stage like a heavy stone. "Could you turn off the backing track?" For a moment, Madeline Cross kept the smile on her lips. A smile practiced through hundreds of press conferences, thousands of appearances before cameras. But her eyes did not follow suit. They darkened. "The backing track is part of the arrangement," Madeline replied, her voice still smooth. "We rehearsed it that way." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "but at this afternoon's rehearsal you sang without it." A murmur spread. At first, very small, like wind slipping through a crack in a door, then faster. Madeline sensed the shift immediately. She turned toward the sound technician, her gaze sharp as a blade. The young man behind the control board swallowed hard, his hand hovering over the fader. "Rehearsal is different from performance," Madeline said, her voice now carrying a slight tension. "We don't have time for experiments." "It's not an experiment," Ethan replied. "It's just singing." That sentence, short, non-aggressive, made the hall fall even quieter. It carried no provocation, but something far more dangerous. Certainty. Madeline gave a soft laugh. "You want me to audition in front of you?" she asked, tilting her head as if teasing. "No," Ethan answered, his voice lower now, clearer. "I just want to know whether you can actually sing it." This time, the murmurs swelled audibly, a few surprised laughs, a few hushed gasps, and many eyes began to shift, from Madeline to the man in the janitor's uniform standing under the lights. Madeline straightened. "Of course I can sing," she said through clenched teeth. "I've been doing it for 15 years. "Then prove it, Ethan," he said. 3 seconds passed. 3 seconds long enough that someone in the front row could hear their own heartbeat. Then Madeline laughed loudly. "Fine," she said, turning toward the sound technician. "Turn off the backing track, all of it." The technician hesitated. "Do it!" Madeline snapped. A click sounded. The familiar, dense sound vanished, leaving the stage brutally bare. Only the piano, light percussion, and a vast open space where a voice had nowhere left to hide. Madeline raised the microphone. The opening lines rang out. Still good, still steady, still technically correct. A few audience members exhaled in relief as if chastising themselves for doubting a star. Ethan did not move. He listened. The song reached the transition. The pitch climbed. Madeline's neck tightened. Her shoulders lifted, a small sign, but impossible to conceal. D5, E5, A5. The voice still rose, but no longer lightly, no longer naturally, like someone forcing open a door too heavy for them. Then came the note that made the legend. The note millions believed only Madeline Cross could reach. She took a deep breath, and her voice cracked. Not a significant accident, not a staged disaster, but enough. Enough for everyone who had heard her sing hundreds of times to recognize it. The sound veered off by nearly a tone and a half, not reaching it, not rounded, shattering like glass hitting the floor. Madeline stopped. She cleared her throat and turned slightly away as if a sip of water would fix everything. "Sorry," she said quickly. "My throat is a little dry." No one applauded. No one laughed. The entire hall seemed frozen in a moment too strange to name. Ethan stepped forward another half step. He did not smile. He was not angry. He was simply calm, calm enough to unsettle others. "You can't sing that note," he said very softly. Madeline spun around. "My voice is tired," she snapped. "Everyone knows that during long performances. But on the album," Ethan cut in, his voice clearer now, "you sing that note 27 times. A whisper rippled through the audience. 27 times? Ethan continued. "And in every live performance video online, every time." "Perfect." Madeline narrowed her eyes. "What are you implying?" Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked out at the hall, straight into the camera lens, capturing every second. "I have perfect pitch," he said. "I hear frequencies." A voice rose from below. "Is he serious?" "C6," Ethan continued, "is 1046.5 hertz. The note you just sang was 932 hertz. The air began to vibrate. "Listen to the recording again," Ethan said, no longer holding back. "The voice on the album is not your voice." Madeline forced a laugh. "That's enough," she said. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I do," Ethan replied, "because I checked the credits." Several people in the audience began pulling out their phones. "Autumn Haze," Ethan said, each word deliberate. "Additional vocals." The hall erupted, not in screams, but in furious whispering, the sound of a secret being torn open. Madeline strode quickly toward Ethan. "Stop this now," she hissed. "Why?" Ethan asked, and for the first time that night, he was no longer afraid. "Because I'm telling the truth?" Madeline's hand clamped onto his arm, not hard, but commanding. "This is over." But before she could pull him away, another voice rang out from the wings. "He's right." The entire hall snapped around. A man stepped out of the shadows, pale-faced, eyes resolute. "Daniel Brooks," he said. "Madeline Cross's sound engineer for the past 5 years." Madeline turned to him as if stabbed in the back. "You're fired," she whispered. "I know," Daniel replied. "But I can't stay silent anymore." He turned to the audience. "Every performance," Daniel said, his voice trembling slightly but not retreating. "I played a pre-recorded track for that high note. She has never sung it live. Not once." Silence fell like a heavy blanket. Madeline shook her head and laughed loudly. "This is ridiculous," she said. "A janitor and a sound technician think they can destroy me?" "I have 2 Grammy Awards," she continued, 4 million albums sold. "Then sing it," a voice called from the audience. "Sing the note." "We just heard you crack," someone else said. Madeline turned to Ethan. "You think you're so good?" she said coldly. "Then you sing it. Right now." No backing track, no preparation, no second chance. Ethan felt his hands tremble, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. From the back rows, an old but steady voice called out, "You can do it, Ethan!" He turned. Ray, the elderly janitor, had worked at this theater for 30 years. The man stood up and began clapping slowly. "Sing the way you sing for your daughter." Ethan closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, not the breath of a performer, but the breath of a father. He nodded to the band. "Higher ground," he said. "No backing track." The chords rang out once more, but this time, everything was different. The opening chords rang out. No thick backing track, no protective layer. Only the piano, light percussion, and a bare expanse where everything could be revealed. Or shatter. Ethan Miller stood at the center of the stage, his legs slightly trembling, his hands still carrying the rough sensation of rubber gloves. The lights shone straight down, exposing every line of fatigue on his face, lines not carved by age but by long nights in hospitals, by cold mornings that began with the sound of a shift bell. He opened his eyes. He saw the hall. 500 silent faces, hundreds of phones held aloft, and somewhere beyond the glare of the lights, millions more are holding their breath. Ethan did not look at Madeline Cross. He did not look at the eyes waiting for him to fall. He looked into the space ahead of him, the same space he looked into every night when he sang his daughter to sleep. He began to sing. The first lines flowed out very softly. No showmanship, no attempt to prove anything. Just a voice placed precisely where it belonged, low, warm, calm, like a story being told. A few people in the audience exchanged glances. "He can sing," someone whispered. But Ethan had not done anything extraordinary yet, and that was precisely what made the hall uneasy. He did not rush. He did not push his voice. He did not charge toward the high notes as if it were a competition. He sang each line as though speaking to a single person, a small one, lying in a hospital bed, hand pressed to their chest, listening. The song moved toward the pre-chorus. Ethan opened his voice a little more. No strain, no tightening of the neck. The sound began to spread, rounder, heavier, carrying weight. It did not strike the hall, it seeped into it. Madeline stood behind him, arms crossed. The smile on her lips remained, but it had frozen. Her jaw tightened slightly as she heard the way Ethan controlled his breath, not like an amateur, not like someone getting lucky, like someone who had lived with his voice his entire life. Then the bridge arrived, the place where everything had once fallen apart. Ethan did not hesitate. He shifted registers smoothly, without a cut, without a forced break, like water flowing from one bank to the other. G5, A5, B5. The hall began to change posture. Those who had been leaning back now leaned forward. The whispers stopped. Ethan closed his eyes. He thought of Emma, of the evenings he sang so softly, afraid of hurting the small, unevenly beating heart, of the nurses who paused at the doorway, listened quietly, then walked away without a word. And then he reached the note. C6. No cracking, no sliding, no support needed. The sound burst forth, clear, bright, pure, like a crystal bell suspended in midair. It was not piercing, not boastful. It was simply right. Ethan held the note. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The hall held its breath. 4 seconds. Someone in the front row raised a hand to their mouth. A whispered, "Oh my God," escaped before it could be stopped. But Ethan did not stop. He went higher, D6, E6, F6, not to challenge, but as if walking a path deeply familiar, a path he had walked hundreds of times in a small apartment, in hospital rooms, in silence, unseen by anyone. His face remained calm. No strain, no grimace, just focus, as though he were doing the most natural thing in the world. Then he descended, one step at a time. F6 down to C6, C6 down to A5, A5 down to F5. Each transition was so smooth that the listener could not detect the moment of change. By the time Ethan completed the bridge and entered the final chorus, the hall was no longer a place of red velvet seats and expensive suits. It had become something else. A space where fame no longer existed, where status disappeared, where there was only a human being speaking the truth through his voice. The final note dissolved into the air. Silence. No immediate applause, no cheering, just a vast emptiness, large enough to hear the breathing of the person beside you. Then a single clap sounded, slow, clear, deliberate. Ray, the elderly janitor, stood up, clapping his hands together, eyes reddened. Another clap followed, then another. Within seconds, the entire hall rose to its feet. The applause surged like a wave, washing away every remaining doubt, every trace of pretense. Those who had scoffed earlier now stood, clapping until their palms hurt. Ethan stood at the center of the stage, breathing hard. He did not smile. He did not bow. He stood there, as though he himself could not quite believe what had just happened. Madeline Cross did not move. Her face had gone pale, not the pallor of fatigue, but the pallor of someone whose footing had just been ripped away under the whole light. From the front row, a woman stood up. Her voice trembled, but it was clear. "That is a real voice," she said. "I've listened to music for 30 years. I know." Another man stood. "I worked in recording studios," he said. "No one sings that note like that without assistance. No one. Except him." Phones were raised higher. The live stream chat scrolled too fast to read. The name Ethan Miller began appearing on the large screen, not placed there by the organizers, but searched and shared by the audience themselves. Madeline finally moved. She stepped toward the microphone. "That's enough," she said, her voice higher than usual. "You're all overreacting. Everyone in this industry uses vocal support. But no one sells tickets for a live performance and then sings with someone else's voice," a voice called out from below. Madeline turned to Ethan. "You'll regret this," she said, quietly enough that only the microphone caught it. "You and your family." Ethan looked straight at her. This time, he did not tremble. "I don't work in your industry," he said. "I sing because I love my daughter." He turned to the audience. "And I think," he said, "you all deserve to hear the truth." No one objected. Madeline stepped back, then another step. She looked around, searching for familiar support, for a powerful face, a reassuring nod. But those who once stood behind her were looking down at their phones. The band stood and applauded Ethan. Ray wiped his tears with his sleeve. Somewhere in a hospital room, a 7-year-old girl was watching the screen, her heart beating more steadily, smiling as she heard her father's voice echo across the world. Ethan did not know that yet. He knew only one thing. 5 years of silence had ended. Not with revenge, not with shouting, but with a voice, honest, unmasked, that shattered a lie more than a decade old. And as the applause continued to echo through the hall, Ethan understood that the worst was still to come. The applause was still echoing through the Chicago Civic Theater when Ethan Miller stepped back one pace. The lights had not gone out. The cameras were still rolling, and the world, having just witnessed a lie torn open, had not yet decided which side to stand on. Ethan felt that uncertainty clearly. The silence after the applause was not unanimous agreement. It felt more like the calm before a storm, where every gaze was weighing the same question: whom to believe, and how far? Madeline Cross was still standing there. She did not scream. She did not run. She stood straight, adjusted her shimmering evening gown as if holding her posture alone might hold together an empire built over 15 years. "What a shame," Madeline said, her voice lower now, more controlled. "A moment meant to be emotional, turned into a witch hunt." A few murmurs followed. Not all of them were against her. "Let us remember," she continued, turning to the audience, "that tonight is about the children. Don't let an unscripted performance destroy that." She was trying to pull the story back into safe territory, but Ethan knew it was already too late. He did not respond. He stood there listening as his heartbeat gradually slowed. The outburst had drained nearly all his energy. What remained was not exhilaration, but something deeply human: anxiety. He thought of Emma, of the hospital room with its familiar antiseptic smell, of the cold number printed on the bill, of the 2-week deadline. No more. Madeline left the stage amid growing chaos. Assistants surrounded her, whispering urgently. The band lowered their instruments. People in the audience began to stand, talk, and make calls. Ethan was guided backstage. A folding chair had been placed against a cold, gray wall. He sat down, hands resting on his knees, trembling slightly. No lights now, no applause. Just a man who had dared to speak the truth, and now had to face the consequences. Ray sat down beside him. He said nothing. He just sat. 10 minutes passed like 10 hours. Then the sound of high heels echoed down the corridor. A woman appeared. Prematurely gray hair, a perfectly tailored suit, a leather briefcase that looked capable of buying the entire room. "Ethan Miller?" she asked, her tone polite to the point of being emotionless. "I'm Olivia Sterling," she continued, "attorney for Ms. Cross." Ray stood up instinctively. "He doesn't have a lawyer," Ray said, calm but firm. "I'm not here to threaten anyone," Olivia replied, a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Just to resolve a misunderstanding." She pulled out a chair, sat opposite Ethan, placed the briefcase down, and opened it. A thick stack of documents was laid on the table. "We all understand that what just happened could lead to unnecessary consequences," Olivia said. "Ms. Cross does not wish to escalate." Ethan looked at the papers, then at the woman in front of him. "What is this?" he asked. "An agreement," Olivia answered. "You sign it, and everything ends." Ethan turned to the first page. Dense, cold lines of text, legal language with no room for emotion. He read slowly. Admission of false statements, public apology, commitment to non-repetition. Ethan looked up. "And in return?" Olivia smiled. "We know you're a father," she said, as if sharing a private confidence. "Your daughter needs heart surgery. The cost is substantial." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "Ms. Cross is willing to cover it in full," Olivia continued. $85,000. Immediately. Ray clenched his fists. "There's more," Olivia said, her voice light as air. "A $100,000 music scholarship for you. Full coverage. No strings attached." One number, then another. Enough to save Emma. Enough to change a life. Ethan looked at the documents again. The words no longer felt cold. They felt heavy as lead. "And if I don't sign?" he asked. Olivia's smile faded slightly. "Ms. Cross will defend her reputation," she said, "by every legal means." "A lawsuit?" Ray asked. "Not just one," Olivia replied. "Defamation, brand damage, disruption of a public event." She leaned toward Ethan. "You have no money, no legal team, and you stood under the lights and called a star a fraud." Olivia paused. "Who do you think the public will side with once the excitement fades?" Ethan closed his eyes. He saw Emma in his mind. Her fragile smile, her small hand was resting on her chest. He saw himself holding a phone, calling the hospital and saying, "We have the money." One signature. Just one. "You have 24 hours, Olivia said, pushing the papers toward him. "If not, tomorrow the press will start asking questions about you, about your motives, about your past." She stood up. "There are truths," she added, "that are better adjusted." Then she left, taking with her a faint trace of perfume and leaving. Behind a room heavy with weight, Ray turned to Ethan. "The girl needs surgery," he said quietly. "No one would blame you if—" Ethan raised a hand. "I know," he said. He picked up the papers but did not sign. That night Ethan did not go home. He went to the hospital. Emma was asleep. The machines beeped steadily. The hallway lights cast shadows across her small face, making her look more fragile than ever. Ethan sat beside the bed. "Daddy," Emma whispered when he took her hand. "I'm here." She opened her eyes and smiled weakly. "I saw you on TV," Emma said. "You sang beautifully." Ethan smiled, his throat tightening. "Were you scared?" he asked. Emma thought for a moment. "Yes," she said honestly. "But Mom says being brave is doing the right thing even when you're scared." Ethan closed his eyes. In that moment, all the numbers disappeared. Only one question remained. What would he teach his child about the truth? The next morning, before the sun had risen, Ethan's phone began vibrating nonstop. Messages, notifications, unknown calls. The first article appeared. "Janitor disrupts charity gala. What was the real motive?" Then the second. "Sources say Ethan Miller dropped out of school and once received public assistance." Then the third. Was this an attempted extortion scheme? Photos of his old apartment were posted. Bad angles, harsh lighting, a cold caption beneath. "This is where Ethan Miller lives." Ethan sat on the sofa, phone in hand, his fingers shaking uncontrollably. The storm had arrived, and he knew the deal was still on the table. All he had to do was call. All he had to do was sign. But when he looked toward the bedroom, where Emma was sleeping peacefully, Ethan put the phone down. He did not call. He stood up. Because there are prices that, if you don't pay today, you will pay for the rest of your life. Morning arrived without bringing light. Ethan Miller woke up in his small apartment on the south side of Chicago, where sunlight could only slip into one corner of the room through an aging window frame. The phone on the table vibrated nonstop, as if someone were trying to drag him back into a reality he was not yet ready to face. He looked at the screen. More than 300 unread notifications. Messages from unknown numbers, social media alerts, emails from addresses he had never seen before. Ethan did not open them right away. He sat still for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of morning. A bus rumbling in the distance, a neighbor shutting a door, the old air conditioner humming steadily. The fragile sense of calm, knowing that with a single touch, it would shatter. Then he unlocked the phone. The first headline hit him squarely. Janitor accuses diva, truth or publicity stunt. The article began with neutral language, but by the second paragraph, the blade was already visible. Carefully chosen phrases, sources close to the matter, unverified accounts, signs of emotional manipulation. Ethan scrolled. Photos of his apartment, old images from 5 years ago, a free meal at an unemployment assistance center, a cold caption beneath them. The little-known past of Ethan Miller. His hands began to shake, not from shame, but from realization. They were moving faster than he had expected. This article was not accidental. It had been prepared. Ethan turned off the screen and leaned back against the couch. He stared at the ceiling, where a thin crack ran across it, something he had always promised himself he would fix when he had money, when he had time, when things were better. But when things were better had never come. The phone vibrated again, this time a call. Ray. "Have you seen it?" Ray's voice was hoarse. "Yes," Ethan replied. A brief silence on the other end. "They've filed a lawsuit," Ray said. $10 million. Ethan closed his eyes. 10 million. A number not meant to win. A number meant to crush. "Not just you," Ray continued. "They're suing the sound engineer too, the studio singer who spoke up, anyone connected." Ethan exhaled slowly. "They want people to be afraid," he said. "And it's working," Ray replied. "Daniel called me this morning. He's panicking." Ethan understood. He understood all too well. The law, when wielded like a hammer, doesn't need to strike to cause damage. Legal fees, time, reputation, mental health, everything becomes a weapon. And Ethan had nothing but the truth. By noon, the articles began to shift tone all at once. No longer questions, statements. A staged conspiracy? A single father and a script designed to exploit compassion. One article went even further. Sources claim Ethan Miller's daughter does not suffer from a serious medical condition as described. Ethan read that line and threw the phone onto the table. He stood up and paced the small room. Each step felt like sinking deeper into thick mud. The more he moved, the harder it became. He thought of Emma, of IV lines, of emergency nights, of the doctor's exhausted eyes when explaining the risks. They were saying it was all fake, and someone would believe them. The doorbell rang. Ethan froze. His heart began to pound harder. He opened the door. A man stood there, gray suit, a document folder in hand. "Ethan Miller?" the man asked. "Yes." "Legal notice." The paper was thin, but it weighed like stone. When the door closed, Ethan stood there for a long time, envelope in hand. He did not open it immediately. He knew what was inside. Cold, emotionless lines declaring that his already fragile life had now officially become a battlefield. In the afternoon, Ethan went to the hospital. Emma was awake, sitting on her bed, coloring. When she saw him, she smiled. "Daddy," Emma said, "today I drew a heart." Ethan sat down and looked at the picture. A red heart, slightly crooked, but carefully filled in. "It's beautiful," he said. Emma tilted her head. "Are you sad, Daddy?" Ethan hesitated for a second. "A little," he admitted. "Because people are saying bad things about you?" Emma asked, innocent yet sharply perceptive. Ethan nodded. Emma put the crayon down. "I think they're afraid of you." Ethan looked at her, surprised. "Afraid?" "Yes," Emma said. "If you were wrong, they wouldn't need to shout so loudly." Ethan smiled softly, a tired smile, but a real one. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep, Ethan sat alone in the hospital waiting room. The fluorescent lights made everything look pale. He held his phone and opened his contacts. Olivia Sterling's name was still there. Just one call. Just one signature. He imagined everything stopping. The press retracting stories, the lawsuit is disappearing. The surgery funds were transferred to the hospital. Emma is getting her operation sooner. He imagined himself apologizing in front of cameras, admitting he had misunderstood, that everything had been an emotional moment. The world would forgive him. It always forgives the ones who stay quiet. His finger hovered over the screen. Then the waiting room door opened. A woman walked in, early 40s, black hair neatly tied back, a simple coat, no suit, no expensive briefcase. "Ethan Miller?" she asked. "Yes?" "I'm Melissa Morales," she said. "An attorney." Ethan frowned. "I don't have money for a lawyer." "I know," Melissa replied. "That's not why I'm here." She sat down across from him. "I watched the video," she said, "and I read the lawsuit." Ethan waited. "This is a strategic lawsuit," Melissa continued. "Not to win, to exhaust you." "So what do I do?" Ethan asked. Melissa looked him straight in the eye. "You fight back." Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. "I'm a janitor." "And they're rich," Melissa said. "That doesn't make you wrong." She opened her bag and took out several documents. "What you said is true," she said. "And the truth is the strongest defense, if you're willing to stand your ground." Ethan looked at the papers, then at the face of the unfamiliar woman. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Melissa was silent for a moment. "Because I've seen this too many times," she said. "And because sometimes the law needs to be used to protect the vulnerable, not to silence them." A long pause followed. "Can I win?" Ethan asked. Melissa did not evade the question. "Yes," she said, "but it will be very hard. They have money, time, media." Ethan thought of Emma, of the small heart beating unevenly, of the question she had asked. If you were wrong, why would they need to shout so loudly? He nodded. "Okay," he said. "Let's do it." Melissa smiled. Not a victorious smile, but the smile of someone stepping into a battle she knew would be long. Outside, the city kept moving. News continued to spread. Lies were repeated often enough to seem true. But in a hospital waiting room, under pale lights, a father and a lawyer had just laid the first stone of a counterattack. An unequal fight had officially begun. Courtroom 4B was smaller than Ethan Miller had imagined. No soaring ceilings, no stage lights, just pale beige walls, hard wooden benches, and a silence that carried weight. Ethan sat at the defendant's table between Melissa Morales and Ray. He wore the only white dress shirt he owned, freshly ironed the night before. The collar was tight, the sleeves hung slightly past his wrists, but he didn't mind. No one was here today to judge how he looked. They were here to hear who was telling the truth. Across the room, Madeline Cross sat upright, her face carefully made up in the style of composed victimhood. 5 lawyers surrounded her, dark suits, thick folders, sharp eyes. Ethan felt the imbalance immediately. Money, power, time. Everything was on their side. When the judge entered, everyone stood. She was in her early 60s, with gray hair neatly arranged and eyes free of unnecessary emotion. "Please be seated," she said. Today's proceeding was not a full trial. It was a preliminary hearing, a request from the plaintiff for a gag order that would force Ethan and all related parties into silence while the lawsuit dragged on. A silencing order, a polite way to suffocate the truth. The plaintiff's attorney rose first. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "the defendant's statements have caused severe damage to my client's reputation and livelihood. We request that the court prevent further dissemination of these unverified accusations." Melissa stood immediately. "Your Honor," she said, "those statements are not accusations. They are facts." A few murmurs rippled through the back rows. The plaintiff's attorney smiled faintly. "That is an opinion," he replied, "not evidence." Melissa nodded. "Then, with the court's permission," she said, "we would like to present the unedited video from the gala night." The judge nodded. The screen lit up. The courtroom fell silent as the footage played, Madeline pulling Ethan onto the stage, the whispered line, "Try to fail quietly," coming through the speakers clearly enough to draw frowns. Then Madeline failed to sing without the backing track. Then Ethan sings. When the video ended, no one spoke. This silence was not empty. It was full. Melissa turned to the judge. "Your Honor," she said, "the defendant did not seek the stage. He was dragged onto it. He did not attack first. He responded after being humiliated." The plaintiff's attorney stood again. "Your Honor," he said, "the music industry commonly uses vocal support." "I did not ask about the industry," the judge interrupted. "I asked about the truth." She turned to the plaintiff's side. "Do you have evidence that Mr. Miller's statements are false?" A pause. "Your Honor," the attorney said, "we believe the context." "Yes or no?" the judge asked again, her voice calm but leaving no room to evade. The attorney inhaled. "No." Melissa rose. "We call a witness," she said. A side door opened. Autumn Hayes walked in. She wore a simple blouse, hair neatly tied back, no heavy makeup, no glamour, no defensiveness. Just a woman stepping into the light after 15 years in the shadows. Autumn raised her hand and was sworn in. Melissa questioned her slowly, one question at a time. "Have you recorded vocals for Madeline Cross's albums?" "Yes." "Were the signature high notes in Higher Ground sung by you?" "Yes." Autumn presented contracts, NDAs, emails state that no credit is to be given. The courtroom began to stir. The plaintiff's attorney stood to object, but the judge raised her hand. "That's enough," she said. She turned to Madeline Cross. "Ms. Cross," the judge said, "you are asking this court to silence others for saying you cannot sing a specific note." Madeline looked up. "Your Honor," "Then prove them wrong," the judge said. "Can you sing that note?" The air froze. Madeline glanced at her lawyers. They avoided her eyes. "Your Honor," Madeline said, "this is not a performance setting." "You have performed on demand for 15 years, the judge replied. "One more time should not be difficult." Madeline opened her mouth. Then it closed it. Not a single sound came out. Everyone in the courtroom understood what that meant. The judge struck the gavel. "The request for a gag order is denied." A light wave moved through the room. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the court finds this to be a strategic lawsuit intended to intimidate and silence truthful speech. Sanctions are imposed on the plaintiff." The gavel struck again. Ethan felt his shoulders sag as if someone had finally lifted a stone he'd been carrying for months. Outside the courtroom, reporters were already waiting. "Ethan, how do you feel? Do you regret it?" Ethan stopped. He took a breath. "I just want my daughter to grow up in a world where the truth isn't auctioned off," he said. "If that makes someone uncomfortable, then maybe the problem isn't the truth." That evening, when Ethan returned to the hospital, Emma was awake. "Daddy," she said when she saw him, "did you win?" Ethan smiled. "I didn't win," he said. "I just didn't lose." Emma thought for a moment. "That's good enough," she said and squeezed his hand tightly. Outside, the news spread. Articles began to change tone. Those who had stayed silent began to speak. Questions no one had dared to ask were now asked out loud. And somewhere, in a small hospital room, a father realized the truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs enough courage to be spoken and enough time to be heard. The storm did not disappear after the judge's gavel struck. It only changed direction. That evening, when Ethan Miller left the courthouse and returned to the hospital, the city of Chicago continued to function as usual. Traffic flowed beneath streetlights. Music spilled out of storefronts. People laughed inside bars. The world did not stop because of a just ruling. But in one small corner of that city, the storm had passed through, leaving behind fragments that were slowly settling. Ethan's phone vibrated nonstop. This time, they were not venomous headlines, not accusations, but short, awkward, uneven messages, as if the senders were unfamiliar with the act of apologizing. I was wrong. I'm sorry for what I said. I watched the video again. Ethan did not reply immediately. He turned off the screen, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. Exhausted from explaining the truth, exhausted from proving what should never have needed proof. He entered Emma's hospital room. She was asleep, her breathing steadier than it had been in days. The small bedside lamp cast light over her thin but peaceful face. Each breath, for Ethan, was an incomplete miracle, waiting for one final condition to become a whole life. Dr. Walsh was standing in the hallway waiting for him. "We need to talk," the doctor said calmly. Ethan nodded. They stepped into a quieter area where the antiseptic smell faded and the machines were no longer so close. "Emma's heart," the doctor said, choosing his words carefully, "is weakening faster than we expected. We can't wait much longer." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "How long?" he asked. "Maybe a week," the doctor replied. "Possibly less." Ethan said nothing. "We'll do everything we can through insurance," the doctor added. "But the surgery cost, you already know." Ethan nodded. He knew all too well. That number was no longer a calculation. It was a countdown clock. That night, Ethan sat alone in the hospital waiting room. It was late. Rows of empty plastic chairs. Pale fluorescent lights made everything feel more fragile than usual. He held his phone. His contacts appeared. Olivia Sterling's name was still there. Just one call. Just one sentence. Just one signature he had refused. Ethan closed his eyes. He imagined Emma on the operating table. The tubes, the gloved hands, the focused eyes. He imagined himself standing outside, helpless. His finger hovered over the screen. Then the waiting room door opened softly. Emma stood there. She wore her hospital gown, pulled her IV stand, and took small but steady steps. "Daddy?" Emma said, her voice weak but clear. Ethan sprang up. "You shouldn't be out here," he said quickly. Emma shook her head. "I heard you leave," she said. "I couldn't sleep." Ethan knelt in front of her, eye to eye. "I'm sorry," he said. "I made you worry." Emma thought for a moment. "Are you scared, Daddy?" she asked. Ethan did not avoid the question. "Yes," he said. "I'm terrified." Emma nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "Mom told me," she said slowly, "that being brave doesn't mean being scared. It means doing the right thing, even when you are." Ethan swallowed hard. "You're doing the right thing," Emma continued softly. "I know." Ethan pulled her into his arms. Her small body was so light it frightened him, and he was afraid that holding her too tightly might hurt her. In that moment, he knew he would not call Olivia Sterling, not out of pride, but because he could not teach his child that truth could be traded for life, no matter how high the price. The next morning, things began to change, not loudly, not explosively, just small stones falling into the right places. A video appeared on social media. A blonde woman sat in a recording studio looking straight into the camera. "My name is Autumn Hayes," she said, "and I am the voice you have been hearing for 15 years. The video spread quickly. Then another appeared, then another. Session singers came forward one by one, each carrying contracts, emails, and proof. No anger, no drama, just the weariness of people who had been silent for too long. Public opinion shifted, not instantly, but irreversibly. New articles appeared, this time with different headlines. The truth behind the famous voice. When one father forced a system to listen. Those who had attacked Ethan quietly deleted their posts. Those who had stayed silent began to speak. And then, early on the third morning, a phone call came. "Is this Ethan Miller?" a voice asked. "Yes." "I'm calling from John Legend's office," the voice said. "He's been following your story, and he wants to cover the full cost of your daughter's surgery." Ethan did not answer right away, not because he didn't believe it, but because he needed a second to breathe. "All of it," the voice continued. "No conditions." The phone slipped from Ethan's hand. He sank to the hospital floor, his back against the wall, both hands covering his face. The tears came without warning, not sobbing, but heavy tears built up from countless sleepless nights. Within 24 hours, more calls followed. Post-surgery support, community fundraisers, offers with no strings attached. No one asked Ethan to apologize. No one asked him to be silent. Only one sentence was repeated. "We believe you." The day of the surgery arrived faster than he expected. The operating room was cold. The lights were bright. Time stretched as a wire pulled too tight. Ethan sat outside the waiting room, hands clasped together, not praying with words, only praying with presence. When the operating room doors finally opened after 8 hours that felt like a lifetime, Dr. Walsh stepped out and removed his mask. "The surgery was successful," he said. Ethan could not remain standing. He cried, this time fully, without restraint, without shame, like someone who had just been given back something he had already prepared himself to lose. A few hours later, Emma woke up. "Daddy?" she whispered. "I'm here," Ethan said, taking her hand. "Sing for me," Emma said. "My heart likes it." Ethan leaned down and sang very softly. Not Higher Ground, not the song that had shaken a stage, but the simplest, most actual song, the one he had sung in silence for 5 years. And in that small recovery room, amid the steady hum of machines, Ethan realized his voice had never disappeared. It had only been waiting for a moment to be raised for the right reason at last. 18 months did not pass as quickly as people imagine. There was no smooth montage, no swelling, triumphant soundtrack, only ordinary days, one by one, where life was rebuilt from the most minor things. Ethan Miller learned how to sleep through the night again, no longer jolting awake at the sound of machines, no longer waking with the feeling that his heart was racing ahead of his body, no longer staring at the ceiling, counting all the things that could still be lost. Emma grew slowly, at the careful pace of a child who had crossed the most fragile boundary. The thin scar on her chest faded with time, like a fine silver line, a mark of a battle won, but never forgotten. Every morning, Emma tied her own shoelaces. Every afternoon, she ran a little faster. And every night before sleep, she still asked, "Daddy, sing for me." Ethan sang, not to prove anything, not because anyone was listening. He sang because now he understood precisely what he had lost and what he had managed to keep. News of that courtroom hearing traveled farther than anyone expected. It was no longer just a story about a diva being exposed. It became a larger, more uncomfortable question. Who is actually singing in so-called live performances, and who has been erased from the story simply because they lacked power? Investigative reports appeared. Podcasts invited industry insiders to speak. Session singers, for the first time, were named instead of being reduced to vague credits. Ethan did not appear everywhere. He declined many invitations, not out of fear, but because he did not want the truth turned into entertainment. When he spoke slowly. When he answered just enough. "I don't want to replace one fake voice with a new idol," he said in a rare interview. "I just want every voice to be acknowledged in its rightful place." Lawmakers listened. First came small meetings, then hearings. Eventually, dry legal language appeared in draft legislation, requiring transparency in live performances, requiring clear disclosure when pre-recorded vocals are used. Not because of Ethan, but because his story made it impossible to look away. One early autumn afternoon, Ethan stood in front of a familiar door, the janitor's room behind the stage at the Chicago Civic Theater. The smell of floor cleaner was unchanged. The old metal locker was still there. The scuffed mark on the floor, where he once stood with rubber gloves on his hands, had never been repaired. Ray was mopping. He looked up when he saw Ethan. "You're early," Ray said, his voice rough but warm. Ethan smiled. "I wanted to say hello first." Ray nodded and said nothing more. The two of them stood side by side for a while, listening to the familiar sounds backstage, the rustle of curtains, instruments being tuned, hurried footsteps. "You know," Ray said without turning his head, "I've worked here for 30 years. I've seen a lot of people come and go, a lot of voices, but very few dare to stand still." Ethan understood. Standing still, in a world that constantly demands you bow or chase, can be the hardest thing of all. That evening, the auditorium was packed. Not seats reserved for elites, no $500 tickets, no shimmering evening gowns, just ordinary people. Nurses, teachers, janitors, single parents, people who had been taught that their voices did not matter. Emma sat in the front row wearing a white t-shirt printed with the words, "My dad's voice saved me." Ethan stood backstage, one hand on his chest, breathing slowly. He was no longer trembling, not because he was more confident, but because he was no longer afraid of losing what mattered most. When he stepped onto the stage, applause rose, not explosive, but steady, a welcome for a human being, not a symbol. "Thank you," Ethan said into the microphone. "Thank you for being here." He did not retell the old story. He did not name those who had fallen. He began with a new song, one he had written in a hospital waiting room during long, sleepless nights. The song was not about victory. It was about not disappearing. His voice was not perfect. There were rough edges. Some notes were not fully rounded. But it was real. When he finished, the hall was silent for a few seconds before the applause began, not out of shock, but because people needed time to recognize the emotion that had just passed through them. For the second song, he invited autumn onto the stage. No more shadows. No more silencing contracts. Two voices blended, clear, transparent, no hiding, no stealing credit. When they reached the final high note, they sang it together. No one is above the other. No one is concealing anyone else. The audience rose to its feet. Emma clapped until her palms turned red. Elsewhere, far from the stage lights, Madeline Cross appeared in a brief news item. No more tours. No more major contracts. Her name was mentioned as a lesson, not for ridicule, but as a reminder. No career stands on purchased silence. Ethan did not read that article. He was at home, helping Emma with her math homework. "Daddy," Emma asked, looking up, "if I do something wrong one day, Should I tell the truth? Ethan set his pen down. Yes, he said, even if it scares you. Even if I might get punished? Especially if you might get punished. Emma thought for a moment. So, telling the truth is being strong? Ethan smiled. Yes, he said. And sometimes it changes huge things. Late that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Ethan sat alone by the window. The city was quiet. Distant lights flickered. He thought about the man who once stood on a stage wearing rubber gloves. The man who had almost signed a piece of paper in exchange for safety. The man who learned that some things, once bent even once, never straighten again. Ethan took a breath. He no longer needed to prove his voice to the world, because the world, at last, had learned how to listen. And as he softly began to sing in that quiet room, with no lights, no cameras, no one waiting for a high note, the voice still rose, unbendable, unbuyable, and no longer silent. No music played when the final curtain closed, no fireworks, no blinding lights focused on a moment of victory. There was only a different kind of silence, a silence that was no longer frightening. Ethan Miller stood in the wings of the Chicago Civic Theater, in the exact spot where he had once stood years ago, with rubber gloves on his hands, a cleaning cloth draped over his shoulder, and eyes that always avoided the lights. But today, no one called him a janitor. No one dragged him onto the stage for entertainment. Today he stood there because he chose to. Emma sat in the front row, her legs swinging lightly with the restless excitement of childhood. She no longer had IV lines, no wires, no machines measuring her heartbeat. Only a thin scar on her chest, like a silver thread, a trace of a battle she had survived. Emma turned back to look at her father and smiled, a smile with no fear in it. Ethan nodded to her. No words were needed. That evening's concert had not been heavily promoted. No massive banners, no glossy media campaign. The tickets were affordable, no VIP seating. And yet the auditorium was packed. The people who came were not there to see a viral sensation. They came to hear a story told with an authentic voice. When Ethan stepped onto the stage, no one shouted his name. No one leapt to their feet right away. There was only a steady, unhurried applause, welcoming a human being, not a symbol. Ethan walked to the microphone. He did not begin with a speech. He did not recount his journey. He did not mention those who had tried to silence him. He said only one simple sentence. Thank you for listening. Then he began to sing. Not the song that had brought him back into the spotlight, not the high note that once made the world hold its breath, but a new song, written in the most ordinary of days. A song about mornings without panic, evenings without counting heartbeats, and the first nights when a father could sleep without fearing an emergency call. Ethan's voice was not perfect. There were notes he avoided. There were phrases where he let the breath pass naturally. But no one needed perfection anymore. They needed truth. When the song ended, there was no cheering, only a brief pause, just long enough for the emotion to reach each person in its own way. Then the applause came. This time, it did not stop. After the performance, Ethan did not go out front. He returned to the old janitor's room backstage. The small room, the familiar smell of floor cleaner. The metal locker, once worn, had been replaced, but it stood in the same spot. Ray was there. He leaned his mop against the wall and looked at Ethan with an expression that needed no explanation. You know, Ray said slowly, I used to think places like this were only for invisible people. Ethan nodded. But it turns out, Ray continued, this is where everything began. Ethan looked around the room. He remembered cold mornings, bent over, mopping floors in silence. He remembered the feeling of being looked through, not hated, but unseen. Maybe, Ethan said, we were never invisible. Maybe no one was willing to listen. Ray smiled. Outside, the world continued to change, not loudly, but steadily. New regulations were passed. Contracts began listing full names. Voices that once lived in the shadows were finally called by their own. Not because Ethan became a hero, but because he refused to become silent. Some articles called him the man who changed the industry. Ethan never used that phrase. Alone, I didn't change anything, he said in a final interview. But one person who refuses to bow can make others stop. That night, when everything had finally settled, Ethan returned home. Emma was asleep on the couch, curled under a thin blanket, clutching an old stuffed bear. On the table lay her drawing notebook, the last page showing a small stage, two figures standing side by side, and a clumsy, handwritten caption, "Dad and me." Ethan sat beside her. He did not sing. He listened to her steady breathing, the simplest sound, and once the rarest luxury of his life. In that moment, he understood what had taken him so long to learn. True victory is not when the whole world stands with you. It is when you can look into the eyes of the person you love most and not have to lower your head. The next morning, Ethan walked Emma to school. She ran into the classroom, then turned back and waved. "Daddy," Emma called. "Don't forget, you promised to sing for me tonight." Ethan smiled. "I remember." He stood there for a moment, watching his daughter disappear through the classroom door. No anxiety, no fear. Just a father watching his child grow, like so many others. And for him, that was enough. This story does not end with the fall of a star. It ends with the rising of ordinary people. People who were taught that their voices were too small, that truth belonged only to the powerful. That silence was the only way to survive. But sometimes, all it takes is one person who refuses to stay silent, and the entire system is forced to listen. If you stayed with this story until the final moment, thank you. Not for watching a video, but for taking the time to listen to a voice. If this story made you think of someone who was overlooked, someone who was told to stay quiet, share it with them. Leave a comment. Please tell us where you're watching from and which voice in your life was once ignored. And if you believe that stories about truth, courage, and ordinary people doing the right thing deserve to be told more often, welcome to Deep Life Tales. Like, share, and subscribe, not for the algorithm, but because here, every voice matters. We'll see you again in the following story.